I've always been a fan of isolation, but living alone in a house near the edge of the Alaskan forest was a new level of loneliness. My closest neighbor, Thomas, lived about a 5-minute walk down the road. His was the only other house for miles. I moved here because I needed peace. This was the perfect place. Thick forest surrounded the area, and the silence at night was almost deafening. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. Thomas had been friendly from the start. He was a bit older than me, maybe in his late 50s, but always kind. He helped me move in, gave me tips about living in the wilderness, and even brought me homemade bread a few times. I figured I couldn't have asked for a better neighbor. One night I was settled on the couch watching a movie. The wind was howling outside, making the trees bend and sway. I had a fire going, trying to keep the chill of the Alaskan winter at bay. I was just starting to get lost in the plot when there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so it startled me. I went to the door and peeked through the peephole. To my surprise, it was Thomas. I opened the door, and he gave me a strange smile. "Hey, Thomas, what's going on?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. The wind was biting, and I didn't want to keep the door open too long. He hesitated for a second before walking in. "I saw someone near your house," he said, his voice low. "They were circling the place, just wandering around. I figured I should come to warn you." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Out here, with no one else around, the thought of a stranger lurking outside wasn't exactly comforting. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, locking the door behind him. "Did you get a good look at them?" Thomas shook his head. "No, it was too dark, but whoever it was, they didn't belong here." I thanked him again, and after a few minutes of small talk, he left. I locked the door, making sure to check the windows as well. Everything seemed secure, but the thought of someone circling my house kept gnawing at me. I double-checked the back door just in case. Eventually I went to bed. I tried to shake off the unease and get some sleep, but it wasn't easy. The wind outside hadn't let up, and every little creak of the house felt louder than usual. I must have dozed off for a bit, but the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of someone talking outside. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the voices were real. I got up, groggy and confused, and walked over to the window. It was open just a crack, letting in a freezing breeze. When I looked outside, my heart skipped a beat. Thomas was standing there, right next to the house, and he wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize was standing with him, his back to me. They were talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I stared at them for a moment, trying to figure out what was going on. Maybe Thomas had gone out looking for the guy he'd seen earlier. I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking it. Maybe they'd caught the stranger, and everything was fine now. Still, it felt wrong. I closed the window and crawled back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I tried to go back to sleep, telling myself it was nothing. Then I heard it, a loud crash from downstairs. My blood ran cold. I sat up in bed, heart racing, listening for any other sounds. It had been the sound of glass breaking, my living room window. There was no mistaking it. My mind went into overdrive. Was someone breaking in? I rushed to the bedroom window and looked out again. Thomas was still standing there, but the man he'd been with was gone. He didn't move, didn't react to the crash. He just stood there, staring at my house. Something was seriously wrong. I grabbed my phone and locked my bedroom door. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told the operator what had happened. They assured me officers were on their way. I stayed in my room, heart pounding, listening for any more sounds from downstairs. After what felt like hours, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me. The police arrived quickly, and after a few tense minutes, they found the intruder. He'd broken in through the living room window, but hadn't made it upstairs yet. But that wasn't the end of it. After questioning me and searching the area, the police discovered something disturbing. The man who'd broken into my house wasn't a random stranger. He was someone Thomas had been in contact with for months. They'd found messages between them, planning something terrible. I didn't get all the details, but it was clear Thomas wasn't the kind neighbor I thought he was. He'd been watching me, planning, and tonight it was supposed to happen. The police arrested Thomas and I never saw him again. I sold the house soon after. There was no way I could stay there, not after what had happened. I moved to New York City, far away from the isolation of the Alaskan wilderness, but I still remember that night. Before we get into the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. It was raining outside, and I was 7 years old. My name is Jubin. I remember sitting on the living room floor, playing a board game with my babysitter, Jenny. My parents had gone to visit my grandma, who wasn't feeling well. They didn't want me to come along, so Jenny was staying with me for the night. The rain was heavy, pounding against the windows, making the house feel like a warm little bubble. Jenny was nice, and I liked her. She always had a smile and made me laugh with silly stories. We were deep in our game when we heard a knock at the door. It was unexpected. My parents wouldn't be back for hours. Jenny got up, looking a little curious. "Who could that be?" she mumbled to herself as she walked over to the door. I stayed sitting with the game pieces scattered around me. I didn't feel scared, just puzzled. Jenny opened the door, and standing there was a girl drenched in the rain. She looked maybe a few years older than Jenny. Her hair was stuck to her face, and she shivered as she spoke. "My car broke down," she said softly, "just outside your house. Can I use your phone?" Jenny glanced outside and saw the car parked awkwardly on the street. It was still running, its lights dim in the rain. The girl seemed harmless enough. She was polite, almost too polite. Jenny stepped back and let her in. As the girl stepped into the house, she shook some of the rain off her arms and wiped her face with the towel Jenny handed her. The house felt different now. It wasn't warm and cozy anymore. It felt tense, like something was wrong. I noticed the girl's eyes flicker around the room as if she wasn't focused on making a phone call at all. It made me feel uneasy. Jenny handed her the phone, but before she could even dial a number, there was a loud knock at the door again. This time, it wasn't soft. It was hard, like someone was pounding on the door. The girl turned pale, and Jenny froze for a moment before walking to the door once more. But before Jenny could reach the handle, the door burst open. A man barged in, his face angry and wild. He had a gun in his hand, and my heart seemed to stop. The girl took a step back, but not because she was scared. It was like she had been expecting this. "Stay where you are!" the man shouted, pointing the gun at us. Jenny gasped, backing away quickly, and I sat frozen on the floor, too terrified to move. The girl wasn't innocent. She had been part of this all along. She had let the man in. The man quickly scanned the room, his eyes darting from me to Jenny to the house itself. He barked orders at the girl, who stood quietly by the door, not looking scared at all anymore. "Check the rooms," he told her, and she immediately started walking around, opening drawers, looking through my parents' things. I could hear her moving through the house, taking whatever seemed valuable. The man stood near the door, watching us closely. His gun never left his hand. Jenny was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she stayed calm. She slowly moved to sit on the couch, trying to keep me close. She whispered, "It's going to be okay," but I could hear the fear in her voice. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. The rain outside felt like it was getting heavier, the sound of it filling the room, making everything feel distant. I kept my eyes on the man, scared that if I looked away, something worse would happen. He walked around the living room, picking up small things. My mum's jewelry, my dad's watch, anything that looked valuable. Just as the man was about to tell the girl to hurry up, the girl came back to the front of the house. "I think we're good," she said to him. It was like they had done this before, like they were a team. The man nodded and looked at the front door, ready to leave, but as the girl reached for the doorknob, something happened. There was a bright flash of headlights shining through the front windows. A car pulled up right in front of our house. It wasn't the girl's broken-down car. This was someone else. The man cursed under his breath, and the girl's face went pale again. It was the police. The man took a step back, trying to decide whether to run, but it was too late. The police officers were already out of their car, walking up the steps to our front door. The man turned to the girl, but she just stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. She hadn't expected this. The police knocked loudly on the door, but when no one answered, they pushed it open and stepped inside. The man tried to move, but the officers were quick. They shouted for him to drop the gun, and after a tense moment, he did. They grabbed both him and the girl, handcuffing them and leading them outside into the rain. Jenny and I stayed where we were, too scared to move. It was only when one of the officers came over to check on us that I realized it was over. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had noticed the strange car and the man lurking around and called the police. My parents came home not long after, shocked and relieved to find us safe. They hugged me tightly, promising that nothing like this would ever happen again, but I knew I'd never forget that night. The rain, the girl, and the man who came bursting in. It was a night that changed how I saw the world. Even now, when it rains, I remember it all too clearly. My name is Isidora, and this is a story I never thought I'd tell. Some things are best left forgotten, locked away in dark corners of memory, but sometimes those dark corners find you again, no matter how far you try to run. It all started when I bought the house on Willow Street. A new beginning, I told myself. Fresh paint, big windows, and plenty of space. I had no idea what I was stepping into. The house was old, that much was clear. The kind of place that had lived through more than one lifetime, standing tall through storms, history, and secrets. But it seemed perfect for me at the time. I was looking for something affordable, and when the realtor showed me the place, it felt like it could be home. She didn't say much about its past. She brushed over most of the details. It wasn't until later that I realized just how much she had left out. The first night was calm. I moved in slowly, getting things organized and placing furniture where I thought it would fit. The rooms were quiet, almost too quiet, but I chalked it up to being in a new environment, away from the noise of the city. Still, there was something about the house that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air seemed thick, almost like it was pressing down on me. As the days went by, small things started to happen. It began with noises, faint at first. Footsteps on the stairs when I was upstairs, the sound of a door creaking open, and I knew none were moving. Sometimes I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving just beyond my field of vision, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Then, one evening, while I was unpacking some boxes in the living room, I found an old photo buried beneath some junk. It was black and white, showing a young girl, no older than 10 or 12, standing in front of the very house I had just bought. She was dressed in white, her hair long and dark, a slight smile on her face. Something about the picture made me uneasy. I couldn't stop staring at her eyes. They seemed distant, hollow. The nights grew worse after that. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the feeling of being watched. My skin would prickle and my heart would race. But when I opened my eyes, there was no one there. I told myself it was stress from the move, that I was just tired, but deep down, I knew it was something more. One night, about 2 weeks after moving in, I heard something that I couldn't ignore. It was late, well past midnight, and I was drifting off to sleep when a scream pierced the silence. It wasn't outside, though. It was coming from inside the house, specifically from the basement. The sound was high-pitched, filled with terror, and it sent a jolt of fear straight through me. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment I considered staying put, pretending I hadn't heard anything. But something drew me out of bed, a pull I couldn't explain. Grabbing my phone for a flashlight, I crept down the stairs, my feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The house was cold, colder than usual, and with every step I took, the air seemed to grow heavier and thicker. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated. The scream had stopped, but the memory of it still echoed in my ears. Slowly, I turned the handle and stepped down into the darkness. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, and as I descended, the chill in the air deepened. My flashlight beam flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Standing in the far corner of the basement was the girl from the photograph. She was wearing the same white dress, her hair hanging limply around her face. Her eyes were locked on mine, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. But it wasn't just her presence that terrified me. It was the way she looked, like she didn't belong in this world anymore. For what felt like hours, we stared at each other, neither of us moving. Then, slowly, she raised a hand and pointed to the far wall. I didn't understand at first, but as I followed her gaze, I noticed something strange, a patch of the wall that looked newer than the rest, as if it had been hastily repaired. I couldn't bring myself to move closer, but I didn't need to. The girl's eyes told me everything. Something terrible had happened in that basement, something that had been covered up, hidden away behind the walls, and now she was trapped, unable to move on. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, I had made up my mind I couldn't stay in that house. Whatever had happened there, whatever was still lurking within its walls, it wasn't something I could live with. I put the house up for sale the very next day. I didn't care about the money I would lose, I just wanted out. Before I left, I did some digging. I needed to know what had happened, why that girl was still there. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. Years ago, a young girl had been murdered in that house by her stepmother. They never found her body, but rumors swirled about the basement, about walls being built where none had been before. I never went back to Willow Street. The house still stands there, as far as I know, waiting for its next victim. But I've made peace with one thing. I will never forget the girl in the white dress, and I pray that one day she will find the peace she deserves.